Hello, and welcome to Jung at Harp. Today we're going to talk about how to transform isolation into solitude. I'm Deborah Henson-Conant, and I'm here with Kathleen Wiley, and this is called Jung at Harp. And what we're doing here is talking about the principles of creativity at the center of my work, which is called The Strings of Passion, and also talking about it in relationship to the principles from Carl Jung. And Kathleen Wiley is a Jungian analyst. I'm a composer and I'm a performer. And we're looking through those twin lenses at creativity and everything around it in our lives. So today we are actually recording this in the midst, hopefully in the midst and not just the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak throughout the whole world. And so we're looking at, what are we dealing with that we deal with all the time, but that this crisis can actually give us opportunities to look at in a more sort of acute way, or a more more under a microscope. And one of the things we talked about was how to transform isolation into solitude, and what we get when we do that, what the benefits are. So Kathleen, would you like to start? And where does this fit with your field?
Yeah, absolutely. People often come to analysis or actually start a new activity, even like perhaps learning to play a musical instrument like the harp, out of a sense of loneliness or emptiness, that something's missing in their life. And that we have a tendency to look for a sense of fullness from within ourselves through the outside world, and through other people and events and things that we do, places we go. And one of the gifts of Jungian psychology, and the gift, I believe, of any spiritual path, and I think Jungian psychology definitely is rooted within a spiritual dimension as well as psychological, is that one comes to realize that at any given moment in time, when one is connected to one's larger self, everything one needs is available. That one has access to all of the creative energies and possibilities of the life force. But that can never, ever be accessed if we keep looking outside of ourselves. And in order to go within, we have to be willing to tolerate this feeling we sometimes call loneliness, or we have to be able to tolerate feeling isolated. Mm-hmm. And by tolerate it, I mean we have to be willing to experience it in our body. We have to be willing to be able to say, wow, there's that, horrible feeling in my stomach, versus saying, oh, there's that horrible feeling in my stomach, I'm going to go eat and get rid of it, or I'm going to go out and run to get rid of this. We have to be able to bear it, so to speak, and consciously bear it so we can relate to it. And, there's a well-known phenomenon in alchemical and spiritual circles that if one can really stay with oneself in the loneliness, then something transforms and it becomes an experience of solitude. And solitude, the difference being that solitude is a being able to be with oneself consciously. So one isn't alone, although one may literally be alone in the sense of being the only person there.
That reminds me so much of music, mm-hmm. and that transition between when we're uncomfortable with something. That made me think about addiction, though, the constantly being looking for outside stimulus in order to sort of hide or get away from the feelings that are coming up. And then it reminded me of music in the sense of that one of the things that I'm always saying to students in the academy is, play this longer, sit down, put on a timer. You're not getting to the meat or the heart or the opening of the door of this piece, because you're just looking for, how can I play it right? Or when we try to get it, we are going at something. This comes to the string of practice, mm-hmm. of practicing and practices. So practicing is when we're trying to get something right. We're trying to get it. And that's great. I mean, I need to practice many things in order to do them. Like even getting on a Zoom call, I need to have a list, I need to go through it over and over again. But practices are where we put ourselves in a position that that thing can get to us, so that we can get through that discomfort of like, well, what am I doing? Like, I've played this 25 times. Am I done? Have I done it? When in fact, no, you haven't. If in a practice, we haven't allowed ourselves for it to get to us and create the transformation in us. And as an improviser and someone who teaches improvising, you have to learn to do something over and over again until it starts taking you to where you and the music are one, instead of trying to craft it all the time. And that just reminded me of it, and that discomfort of like, but I don't know what I'm doing, but I mean, it's not going anywhere. Like, what's happening? I don't get it. To sit with that and let it unfold.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, it's very similar because, every musician, every creative artist, and I believe there are creative artists even in the fields of engineering and science. I mean,
Yeah.
there are creatives everywhere. Every creative person works in isolation. There's a process that they relate to internally. And yes, they may come a time where they share that internal process with someone else, and then there's a co-creation that happens.
Right.
But the starting of it is in quote isolation. However, if I'm going to make a distinction between the felt sense of isolation and solitude, I would say that the creative has moved from feeling isolated in their process to having an experience of being in solitude. And then out of that solitude, vision comes. The vision for the vaccine, the vision for the creative composition, the vision for how to restructure your daily schedule, whatever that vision is, so that we have to be able to be present to ourselves. And that means being willing to be present with ourselves without blame or judgment, telling the truth, being present without blame or judgment, and listening to whatever's going on in us has to say. And this is what begins to happen when people are alone. All of a sudden, they have to deal with whatever those niggling, uncomfortable body sensations are. Or all of a sudden, they are left alone with their automatic fantasies that they find disgusting, or they think, oh my God, I can't think that, or whatever. And so when you're left alone, you have to be able to be present with yourself, to say, wow, I wonder what that's about. Because until we can be present with it and wonder about it, then we're going to keep running from it. And we stay disconnected from a source of energy that is a part of our own being.
That's so many things, came to my mind. And I'm also realizing that one of the things I really want us to do is actually show a how. How can we do this? Mm-hmm. As you were talking, I was thinking about Steinbeck. There's a quote, I don't know it perfectly, but something like, nothing is ever created in a collective sense. He said invention or creation is always happening in the lonely mind of a human. I'm sure I'm misquoting that, but it was one of my favorite quotes growing up as an artist. And I mean, Steinbeck is such an interesting, because he thought so much about society and community, and yet he was aware of that sense of isolation and loneliness and the beauty of it and what can grow in it. And there's so many things I wrote down here. Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, those voices! As you were talking about it, I was realizing, oh my gosh, maybe that's one of the reasons why. Well, you would know. You're the analyst. Why we have those inner voices to actually fool us into thinking that we're not alone, or as a surrogate because at least if I'm complaining about myself to myself,
Mm-hmm.
I am getting something that I can, that is kind of like external stimulus, but it isn't. And therefore it becomes totally circular because I'm inventing the external stimulus that I'm responding to. And so I'm very interested to hear how you would have people kind of address this. And I would love to show actually on my instrument, one of the things that I'm doing a class right now, I'm creating it, that's really breaking it down. It's called One Song.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, instead of learning all kinds of different things, it's about taking one song and breaking it apart and learning all the different parts of it and really getting deep into it. I don't know what all those shadows are. There's sometimes shadows in front of me. I'll pull this a little bit closer, but I don't know if this will be able to be heard, but I don't know.
I think you're going to need to turn it up.
Okay,
You
or
can't
I
hear
could
Better.
just play louder.
Play louder. Yes.
Which is one of the amazing things of being a human being attached to an instrument. I don't even need to hit a knob. So this song, it's a song, and you know, I'd sing it, and it's a big song, with a lot of different things. But as I'm teaching it, I'm encouraging students to take just the very first part of it and play it over and over again, and really feel that, to be able to take a part of it, to distill it to its essence, to master it, meaning to feel that, well, I'd love to know what your definition of mastery would be. For me, it is feeling one with it, is the moment when I am no longer making a translation between what are the notes that I'm thinking, but I'm one with this thing. It is as simple as walking, and it speaks for me. And if I play that long enough, instead of trying to play the whole piece and blah, 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 but I really take that distilled, one little seed of it and play it, but literally for like 5 minutes, like put a timer on and get into the discomfort of my brain thinking I need to do a lot of things, and actually connect with this thing and connect with the experience of actually being able to do it. So it's like one word. I mean, I'm thinking about when people meditate, they say Om sometimes. Mm-hmm. And why? I mean, I don't know the reasons, but I'm assuming Om is music. It's one note. It's no different than music. And we can also, I'm sure there's also reasons, that I don't know about vibration or whatever, but we can have that same experience of something speaking for us, even by playing the same thing over and over again, even by playing one note and really feeling it. I don't know if you can hear that low note, but the low note. And when we have an instrument like the harp, there's so much vibration that I'm feeling that then helps me see all the other vibration around. But the thing that I would say to people is, and to myself, is to take that time. And if I have to put a timer on to take the time, put the timer on to take the time, so I can sink in to the actual experience and let it get to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's just how you do it psychologically and emotionally, is that you let yourself sink into it and be with it. But the dilemma is that often people are terrified if they allow themselves to sink into or be with an emotional state, they may never come out of it. For instance, anxiety or depression. Often I work with people who'll say, I'm just terrified that if I start to let myself feel any of the depression, I'll never come out of it. So part of the loneliness that gets set in motion, which I'm going to define in this moment as a disconnection from one's larger self, is a defense to try and keep from losing oneself. The problem is it backfires. It backfires.
Right.
And
Right.
so as adults, we often are left kind of caught in this dilemma where something that's got set in place automatically before we even were conscious enough to know what was happening served us maybe when we were 3 or 4, but here we are at 50, 60, whatever, 40, 30, 70, and it isn't working anymore. It's blocking us. And so one has to be able to distill down to the essence that this is not the whole me. You know, this is one experience I've had.
Uh-huh.
This is one energy state in me, but it's not the whole me. And sometimes when I'm working with people who are afraid to be with their emotions, whatever they are, I will say to them, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you set up a phone date with a friend or make a coffee date to meet with somebody, and then give yourself 15 minutes to sit down and just do stream of consciousness journaling and ask this feeling to talk to you and tell you whatever it wants you to know. But then the timer goes off on the stove and you get up, you stop, you say, I'll be back. Thank you for talking to me. I'll come back at another time. But then you get up, you call your friend, you go out the door to your coffee date or whatever it is that you're doing, so that it's a way to begin to, I call it titrating, titrating the emotion to where it can be experienced in manageable bits.
Wow, that's, first of all, it's really fascinating that we're both talking about using a timer. And I'm talking about using a timer. Well, I think we're both calling this to keep you there, to keep you in your seat that long. But I really love that you're also talking about getting us out of our seat. And I realize that's another really important part of connecting with an instrument, is to be totally in it and then get away, and then come back.
Yeah, and you're talking about what you're doing with the one song is you're breaking it down into manageable bits. So instead of sitting down with the entire piece of music and thinking, oh, I have to learn this entire piece of music right now, you say, okay, all I'm going to learn are these 3 measures. And then I'm just going to really be with these 3 measures and experience them and keep being with them, playing them, practicing them, until all of a sudden I have this practice of oneness with what I'm playing, with what is expressing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
so
right.
that principle of distilling down to the purest essence so that it's a manageable bit, so we can integrate it, whether it's an emotional state we can integrate, or it's a musical phrase we want to be able to play with expression and heart.
I want to go back to this oneness. That really hit, made a connection for me. That is the experience that I have. Certainly when I first started playing the instrument, I felt a lot of disconnect and disorientation, and I didn't know how it worked. I mean, I started as an adult, and so I'm really conscious of that. And I was conscious of how, I would throw myself on the floor and cry, why do I have to work twice as hard as everyone else to be half as good? And I just couldn't get it. And I really couldn't get it. And then there came a point when I began to understand that it had become part of my voice. That I was one with it, and it extended my voice. And what I'm hearing you say, and I deeply believe this, is that we don't have to wait until some far off moment of mastery. We can achieve the experience of a peak musical experience at any moment if we break it down enough that we really can master that moment, that small thing. And to feel like, I know that I think a lot of my students and myself will feel like, but I'm never going to get the whole thing. I'm never going to get it. And that's such a consumeristic idea, rather than thinking, even if I never get the rest of the song, is this not magnificence?
Right.
And can I let myself into that absolute magnificence
Of where you are in the moment.
right? Can I actually be here in the magnificence of this moment?
Yes. And I want to circle back to you mentioned mastery, and when you mentioned mastery and how might I define mastery, or what would I say about it? What came to my mind was a quote from the Tao Te Ching that says, mastery of others is strength, mastery of oneself is true power. When one is content to be oneself and not compare or compete, then everyone will respect you.
But will I respect myself?
Yeah. Mastery of others is strength. Mastery of oneself is true power. When one is content to simply be oneself and not compare or compete, then everyone will respect you.
I love that until the last thing, because like, if I was content to not compare, why would I even need anybody to respect me?
Exactly. Therein is the solution. I mean, because if you're content being yourself, it's a non-issue.
Right.
And
right. Oh, I see. So it's a riddle in a sense.
It's like a riddle. It's like often spiritual text, are riddles. But I think too, the reason I brought it back in at this moment is that when you were talking about if you never learned anything but that first phrase of the one song, and you really let yourself be with it and experience the magnificence of it, then that in and of itself is enough. That is the being content to be oneself in the moment. And, we cannot move forward if we don't claim where we are now, whether it's moving forward in our individuation process to live more fully who we are, or it's moving forward in our skill set on the harp or any other instrument, or moving forward in our ability to relax and be more creative, whether it's in our life personally or if it's in our music. And so that ability to claim where we are and let it be enough is critical. I mean, it's essential. It's essential. It's essential to living more fully. It's essential to being more creative. It's essential to resolving any problems that may show up in the inner world or the outer world.
Is to have that moment be enough. And as you were saying that, I was thinking the other beautiful thing about actually, like, if you were to have that enough, that one chord, is to realize that every other chord is the same thing. It's just, if you played that chord over and over again, at one moment it would open it up itself. It would open itself up to being slightly different. I would not have to change it. I would sit here and play this over and over again, but without trying to keep it be that, to let it be that. If we let it be that, it may open up to become this, which is just a slight shifting and yet the same thing. Yes. And so when we let that happen, and then once we have those two things, it becomes something that can happen over and over again. And then sometimes it starts to have a rhythm to it, and everything, and all the things we long for open up out of that, out of being willing to be with that one simple thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that willingness to be with that one simple thing and experience it, there's an organic process that opens up the next thing. And that happens
Yes, talk about that.
well, it happens organically in our psyches. That, people often say to me, what do I do? How do I make that happen? And I just say, well, I say if there was the 1, 2, 3 formula, I would give it to you, and I'd be on Oprah. There isn't a 1, 2, 3
Right.
formula. The formula, if there is one, is being with whatever is in the moment. And being with means having a conscious sense of self to relate to it.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is there is nothing we can control. It is actually giving ourselves over to that is the formula.
Giving ourselves over to it in the sense of being willing to be in relationship to it. Giving ourselves over to it in the sense of being in relationship to it doesn't mean we're just going to collapse into it, or that we're going to act it out, or that we're going to indulge it. But it means that we're willing to surrender and say, okay, here's this depression, and it's going to be a part of my psychic landscape today. Now what? Or, okay, here's my anxiety, and how do I want to respond to that? Because it's a part of my psychic landscape today. But there's a lot more in your psychic landscape. But what happens is we can get caught feeling as if that's all there is. And that is often what gives rise to what we experience as isolation. Versus, oh, look, there's that ugly, thorny tree of anxiety. But look over here. Oh, but look in the middle of it. There's this gorgeous rose I love. How am I going to pick that rose and not get pricked? I mean, it's working with the emotional states and our body sensation states a lot like we would work with a garden. That we can't make the garden grow, but we can weed. We weed out the negative thoughts. We can fertilize. We can put in positive thoughts, visualization, learning, spiritual tools. We can water with our practicing awareness, meditation kinds of techniques. We can prune by saying, I'm cutting that habit out, and this is how I'm going to support myself in doing it. But it's an organic process of growth. But we have a choice about how we garden our psyches. We have a choice about how we garden our practice and practices with our musical instrument. So for me, that analogy is the best one, because we all trust the process of nature growing. I mean, spring is here. I was out this morning on my deck watching this gorgeous sunrise and hearing the birds. And we were out last night on the deck underneath the stars, and John was singing and playing to me. He was singing songs from the sad songs of activist Saigon, like Aragon Mill, where the mills were going, the textile industry was dying, and the strip mining songs that Cy wrote. And then I said, play me something happy. And so then he played me Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. Then he went to Stranger in a Foreign Land by Leon Russell. We had this gamut of all these human emotions that are so poignant right now in our collective psyche, as well as our personal psyches, and that are they're the fabric of human experience throughout the ages.
Now, you've talked about relationship, and I've talked about transformation. We brought those two words in, and I'm having a feeling that they're in relationship here. Whoops. And so, we started off by saying, or I started off by saying, that I wanted to get to the point of understanding how to transform isolation to solitude. And so, to sort of wrap that up, I would love to know, what do we get out of solitude? I mean, I think you said that, but let's just talk about it again. What do we get out of solitude, and what is the process of transforming isolation into solitude? I think we've talked about that, but how would we wrap that up?
Well, I would wrap it up by saying that when we garden our psyche, and with the principles of gardening our rose bed or our vegetable garden, That is how we transform isolation into solitude. And we don't really transform it because it's an organic process, but we do the work that invites it. We do the work of preparing psyche for it to happen. You know, my yard, your yard will grow things, but it may not grow what we want. But if we garden,
Right.
we're much more apt to get what we want.
Right.
So
we can cultivate those things we want while not cultivating those things that we that aren't what we want.
Yeah. And then out of solitude, and I think, you know, the great mystics write about this, and the spiritual teachers, that when we're in a place of solitude, often that's experienced as having a deep peace, a deep contentment, you know, this sense of oneness that is visceral, even though it may not be tangible to physical touch, but it is visceral. One feels it in the body. And out of that, I believe what happens is people then are open to the deeper recesses of the psyche soul, where all creative energies arise from. And those energies then bubble up, and vision. We begin to have a vision. And if we relate it back to the strings of passion, often what bubbles up that gives rise to the vision is an impulse.
Right, because we're touched by that.
Right. Right.
And then, especially in a time of solitude, using practices to become one with something.
Yes.
For me, I love integration with a thing, you know, whether it's, I mean, I just love using tools and instruments. But I'm hearing what you said in this, that I can also explore the possibility of myself as, like, without integration through my hands of something.
Yes.
And that's quite uncomfortable for me, because I love to touch things and play with them. That could be a very interesting experience for me, to see where isolation can bloom into solitude. And I think that's what you're talking about, how isolation, how we can cultivate our lives in such a way that isolation can bloom into solitude. Is that?
That's absolutely right. And so instead of being afraid of the isolation, and instead of going into activities that can numb what one's experiencing in one's physical aloneness, to really see it as an invitation and an opportunity to connect with what's really going on underneath the surface within you. Because your point to what, I think it was Hemingway you said that you were quoting? Steinbeck earlier, is that Jung says that we change the world one person at a time. That if things are going to change for us collectively in terms of all of our systems, economic, political institutions, then that change is going to come from changes that occur within individuals. And that individuals then begin to work at a grassroots level, and something shifts.
You're saying grassroots and talking about gardens, and I'm thinking we can work at a grassroots level with ourselves as well. So I just want to ask two things to pull them in. So one is how to then, is sharing a process, is sharing part of this? And back to your question that some of your clients, like, if I do go into an area that is scary and I feel like I can't come out, what do I do? Those two things.
Yeah, so I'll answer that one first. I think, again, if you're aware that there are some emotional states that could really pull you under, and, you know, so you get caught in a depression where you don't get out of bed or shower or eat for 3 days, then you do want to, I believe, go into that emotion with someone with you in a container, like a therapist, an analyst, you know, someone who is trusted. If you have a relationship where you can reach out to someone, if it's not that severe, but you don't want to lose the whole afternoon to it, then it often can mean calling a trusted friend, or setting up an appointment that you have to be at, that you know will help you rally and pull yourself out of it to the outer world. Jung once said that when we're having a confrontation with the unconscious, that the one thing that is effective against the unconscious is hard outer necessity.
What
Hard
that's
outer.
a confrontation with the unconscious. This is something I wish I would put on the agenda to talk about
Okay,
that.
that can be another whole topic.
Right.
But basically, in this moment, I would say that if you are caught in feeling isolated and lonely, and that you're having uncomfortable body sensations and emotions or fantasies come up, then those are bits of information from the unconscious that now you have an opportunity to confront, to meet with your face. That's what confront means. Confront,
Okay.
C-O-E,
Oh,
with
okay.
your front, with your face. So you're having an opportunity to confront them. Hard out of necessity is, oh, I have to be on this work call at 11 o'clock.
Okay. I see.
I can journal and be with this for 20 minutes. Then I got to get myself in the shower and get dressed for the appointment.
I see.
And
I
so
see.
that's the
So
way.
I get it. So we can actually set up the practices of, with timers, like we said,
Yes.
of when we're either going into music or whether we're going into ourselves, whatever we're going to be really connecting at that deep level, and then alternate it with appointments with the outside world.
That's right.
However that is set up. That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And if the other question slipped my mind. Maybe I answered it in the first. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember what that question was. All right. Well, sharing. So once, so you go into this place. Yeah. Is there any sharing involved in that?
Well, I want to say that there's a time to share and there's a time to hold it within oneself. And I don't know that we have time right now to talk about or tease out those nuances.
Okay.
What I would say is I think sharing can be very helpful, and definitely if you're in a support group that's encouraging each person to keep their individual process, sharing can facilitate transformation. There are other times where people start sharing and one disconnects from one's own experience because it's not like someone else's. And then the sharing has a negative effect. So I think we just have to be aware of how we're impacted by the sharing, and is it helping us stay more in our own center and our own being, or are we getting caught in the comparing and competing?
Right.
And that pulls us out of our center. And so that would be, I think.
Wow. That's beautiful. And that's something that we can do when we're alone as well, because as we're engaging with an instrument, and it can be any kind of instrument, and when you are in isolation, forced isolation, that can be a great time to start playing with an instrument. But as we do that, or engage in anything, at least for me, voices start coming up. Like when I start engaging with technology, which is my challenge, all kinds of voices come up. And that's a great time for me to collect them. And wait a minute, this came out of something you just said, and now I'm forgetting the thread there. But that when that stuff does come up, we want to collect it somewhere instead of just having it spin around. And I just realized that one of the things I give my students, and I can maybe put it down here, is an ick pot. Or a demon pot. It's like it's just a PDF. It's a pot where I put, I think, all the things that are coming up in my head inside the pot, so that I can see them and they're in there and I can deal with them. And that's a way of using creative expression to actually bring something out, so that we can deal with it in a different way. So those are what I love about this. Is we've talked about what we were going to talk about, but we've got two new subjects. And one is that I can't remember, something about we'll be able to go back and see it, and then about sharing and when sharing helps us, when sharing can get in the way. Is there any last thing that you want to say? I'm telling people to, if you play any kind of instrument, to break what you're playing down to just two or three gestures, and really get into those and see how much fun and how much connection you can get with those, and pull them out of the whole. And that's a beautiful practice to have. And Kathleen, what practice would you like to encourage people?
I just want to really encourage people to take to take the invitation to be with yourself and to really think about those principles of gardening psychically and what's needed in your garden right now. You know?
Well, what I was thinking was, you're never alone if you're really there.
That's exactly right. And this is what all of the great mystics experienced. And I don't think just great mystics, but I think some of our, scientists who are mystics, because in those moments of that solitude, something came up to them that they could have never figured out on their own.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Kathleen, thank you so much. I'm
You're
just
welcome.
every week I remember back to the phone, to the conversation we were having in your car, and how much I wanted to continue that conversation, and how much I'm loving that chance to do that.
Yeah, me too. So, yeah,
Okay, I'll see you next week.
terrific. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.